Sullivan. We're our interviewing Herculaneum's bicentennial committee.
We have these guys introduce themselves.
I'm John Dugan, graduated from Herculaneum in 1963. Lived up on Joachim Street, up from the what's presently Donnelly's Barber Shop. That's where I grew up. Right now I live up on 133 Dunklin, down from the Dunklin gravesite.
Chuck Polette. I was born in Herculaneum. My dad was Charles O. Polette. My grandpa was Charles F. Polette. We all lived right here behind the high school. I lived here until basically about 1980, and then I moved south of Festus on Mechanical Road.
I'm Frank Dugan. I also grew up in Herculaneum. Graduated from Herculaneum High School in 1963. Lived up on Joachim. And I presently live in South Herculaneum, just off Scenic. My parents were Ernest and Mary Dugan. My grandparents were Catherine and John W. Dugan. And I've lived off and on in Herculaneum my entire life.
All right. Can you guys tell us a little bit about how many generations have lived in Herky?
Well, like Frank said, my grandfather, John W. Dugan, he was here forever, I think. He had a coal business here, ran a filling station / car repair shop down across from Doe Run. Dabbled in the lumberyard business somewhat. And I believe at one time he was even had a funeral home. And then he lived here till he passed away. And he ran a car dealership in Crystal City then, a Dodge Limited car dealership. And my father was born and raised in Herculaneum. And he continued to live here until he passed away. Mom and Dad lived their whole life up on Joachim, as did my grandfather, John W. Dugan. My other grandfather was Frank Stice. He and my grandmother, they weren't natives of Herculaneum. They moved around quite a lot. And when Grandma Stice died, she did die in Herculaneum, lived down off Church Street.
Well, my grandparents, Charles F. Polette and his wife, lived right over here, 2 houses from in back of the gymnasium. They raised 9 kids there. They all graduated from Herculaneum. My dad was one of those kids. He built a house next door to them, which is the first house at the north end of the football field. And I was born in Herculaneum, down by the Baptist Church, and from there we moved to St. Louis during the war. After that, Crystal City, and then back to Herculaneum. And my grandparents and my dad lived here until they died, and I lived here until 1980. Now I live south of Festus. I had 3 kids that went to Herculaneum until 1980, but then they all finished at either Festus or St. Pius. I graduated in 1959 here at Herculaneum.
Right.
I can add a little bit to my brother, his story. He pretty well covered where we lived and everything. They did use my grandfather's home as a funeral parlor. I remember my father talking about, I want to say 1918 or 1919, when the flu epidemic ravaged across the country. They converted it temporarily to a funeral home to accommodate the fact that there was not many facilities to do anything with the funeral procedures. And I'm pretty sure my father said that of the 22 or 23 classmates he had in the 8th grade, I want to say 5 or 6 of them they died from the flu epidemic, which was very common then. And, you know, it's like I said before, I was born here and went to school, and the only time I have moved away, when we were in the service, and I've lived in surrounding areas like Festus, back to Herky, back to Festus, and now I'm back in Herculaneum, and I did live on the East Coast when I was in the service. But I've stayed here and always come back for whatever reason. I guess I enjoy it.
Did you or your family ever work in Herculaneum?
Myself, no, I take it back. Yeah, we had some real great jobs in Herculaneum as we grew up. My brother and I both were delivery truck drivers for Lupke's grocery store. It was in downtown Herculaneum, which had a downtown shopping area. We were the grocery delivery boys and did other odds and ends for Mr. Lupke. Homer Lupke was his name. He had a grocery store there for years. Other than that, I don't believe I ever had a job in Herculaneum.
What type of wages did you earn there?
I want to say we were paid maybe $1 an hour, plus he provided lunch, which back in the early 1960s, what have you, that wasn't bad. And he let us, it was a grocery store, and he had a meat counter and everything. We basically got anything we wanted while we worked for him, and we enjoyed working there. So it really was not a very hard job.
What about you, Chuck? Did you ever work in Herculaneum?
Personally, I never did. Well, very little. I was always a carpenter, and I did work down at Doe Run when they put the cindering plant. Added the tallest building down there. I worked on that. My grandpa worked for the water department in Herculaneum, and my dad, he was also a carpenter. He basically worked in St. Louis, same as me, but Dad also did put the building that's right at the end of the gymnasium here, where the old office was.
Mm-hmm.
Took that down up at Jefferson Barracks after the war and brought that down here and put it there, and also brought the cafeteria. Now the cafeteria's been torn down. That's the property we're sitting on right now. But that other building's still sitting there, and that's an old building. Yeah, that's the only time I ever worked in Herky was a short time down there, and it wasn't for Doe Run, it was for a subcontractor.
John?
Well, in addition to what Frank said about the Homer Lucky AG store down by the Catholic Church, I remember what I was paid down there. We only worked Saturday, normally, unless somebody, because we had school, paid $10 a day. You had to be there 6:45 in the morning, and normally you're done by 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. Drove an old rattle trap Chevrolet panel truck around that had a canvas cover to keep the weather out of the groceries, and we carried, well, you guys wouldn't even realize this, they put the groceries in cardboard boxes, put the name of the customer and how much they owe. They put the little ticket in there, and you collected, unless they had an account, you collected the money from the house that you went to. And you know, there was various characters you went to, but other than working there, I worked 2 summers at Dole Run, which was then St. Joe Led, when I was in college. I worked there like 8-9 weeks a summer, and I'll tell you this, when you work in a place like that, it makes you want to go to school and get an education, because the old timers down there, they used to make fun of it, and they called it the health center. You know, you're going to work at the health center, you know, and it wasn't very healthy. It's a lot better now than it was in its 100 times better now. But I worked there 2 summers, and wages, you know, I thought they were good wages to work down there. But old Bill Stotler, who used to be the principal AD here, he told me actually we were working down there for about $2 and a dime an hour. We thought that was big money. We were getting maybe $18 a day.
What you said it was hard work. What kind of work were you doing?
When they hired the college kids down there like us, they put us in the usually in the furnace, for the blast furnace, where they dealt with the iron ore. And none of the jobs that I ever had were what you consider a good job. They were dirty and dangerous and hot, and sort of primitive down there. And the old timers, they like to mess with us college kids, give us crummy jobs to do to see if we could get through the day. And I look back now at things that they had us do, and it's a wonder some of us weren't severely injured. You know, I had couple smashed fingers once. A lot of the full-timers were burnt down there. You know, there's been deaths down there, but I can't say that I was ever in a situation like that. But they weren't real good jobs. I always sort of admired the old-timers here in Herky that put their 30 to 40 years in, that had to work those jobs. You know,
You weren't protected by any kind of union or anything?
they had a union then. It was actually 688 Teamsters, where I worked part-time in the summer of it. The jobs were so dangerous. You know, OSHA wasn't involved back then. And, you know, they carried the pots of lead with the cranes right over the top of you. How you were out there doing your yard work, and you just sort of hoped it didn't spill.
Okay. Were you guys involved in any athletics in high school here at Herky?
Well, I liked most sports. I like basketball. I was involved in basketball. Track, we were, as Herculaneum is now, we were a big track school then. And a little known fact, when my brother and I were freshmen, that was the last year Herculaneum had baseball. They terminated baseball at the high school level after our freshman year, and it went 9 years before it came back. We were always told, none of us really knew why. We liked track too a little bit, you know, but baseball we liked a lot better. But we were told that one of the coaches said that baseball was killing the track program. So he wanted to solve the problem by doing away with baseball. And if you wanted to do any sport, you know, in the spring, your one choice was run track. And evidently it worked, because the track team stayed at a high level. I don't know if that was true or not. Well, I enjoyed track and the 1 year of baseball and then basketball. That's what I did.
I really didn't do anything. I tried, but I never made the team. I was pretty small in school. I was 5 foot when I was a freshman. And I didn't agree with some of the coaches we had back then either. We had a coach named Coach Hall when I was a freshman, and made you shoot all your free throws underhanded. You weren't allowed to shoot anything overhanded. And you know, it's a hard thing to learn how to do. I played on the 8th grade ball team, but then when I got into high school, I wasn't, basically it wasn't big enough.
I also participated in basketball. I wasn't real hep on the track. I played on that 1 year baseball team when I was a freshman. Truth on this was, Frank was a better athlete than I was. For some reason, he could run. He always could run. I was a pretty average runner. And, you know, my senior year when I was in varsity, I was starting on the varsity basketball team. I wasn't a very good shooter. And after about 5-6 games in the season, we had a guy named, I won't forget him, a guy named Gary Reese, moved here from Marmaduke, Arkansas, and he was considerably better than I was. And within a week or so, he sort of took my spot. I became a bench player, and he was a starter. And he was a good guy. And we wound up winning. It's a good thing he showed up, really. Because we started, Frank started, and Reese started, and we had another senior, about a 6'3" guy named Bill Carter started, and we had our 2 phenomenal sophomores, Bruce Thomas, who without a doubt is our best basketball player we've ever had in Herculaneum. He went on to play at Oklahoma State a little bit. And then we had Mike Brady, who's a guard. He started as a 10th grader. And, you know, that hodgepodge of players, we won 16 games, and I think we were 16-12 our senior year. Not too long after that, the guy who took my place, this Reese guy, he moved back to Arkansas. And don't know whatever happened to him, but and as far as track goes with me, I wasn't, I couldn't run. I wasn't a very good runner. And they made you run, they stick you in some kind of event because we didn't have baseball. And they'd always put me in like the mile. I was one of these guys when the announcer would, after the race was over, he'd make the announcement, clear the track, runners still out. Which I remember. I used to do that when I announced over here at Herculaneum Traffic, just clear the track. There's a couple of calls out there still running. That's it for me.
Where did you attend church at?
I belong to the Herculaneum United Methodist Church. I got from Doe Run, just north of Doe Run, which is still standing down there. It's right on the river. Went there as a kid. I guess basically all the way through high school. That was our church. It was the church our grandpa got started in. So we were pretty involved in Methodist church.
Went to Assumption Catholic Church, which is downtown, or he's still there. I don't know how long it'll last. I don't know how many people there left going down there. But that's where we went.
I also went to Herculaneum Methodist Church. And to correct John, I think our senior year we were 18-9. I know this could be Crystal City. And the kids at school now, when I tell them that, they sort of can't understand that. And I try to explain to them that Crystal City has some outstanding teams. Not that they're bad now, but they had some outstanding athletes down in Crystal City back in the 60s and 70s, back to the U50s. And they won the basketball conference. We could not beat those guys. And when I still see these guys around Festus and Crystal, they always remind me that they're all still around and kicking. We could have played them 50 times and never beat them. But I don't know, there's more of a rivalry then between Festus, Herky, and Crystal. We didn't really include schools in being big rivals like Hillsborough, Northwest, Fox. There was no Grandview. DeSoto was not, to me, a big rival. It was basically Herculaneum, Festus, and Crystal. We got along with them, but now I notice these kids in the schools now hang out with each other some. We would have never thought of doing that, of spending our spare time with someone from Festus or Crystal City. I don't know why. Maybe we weren't very good people. But I notice the kids nowadays, when I substitute, they have a lot of friends in the other schools. And we just didn't socialize. We knew who they were, and we're buddies with them now and what have you, but back then, there was not much interaction, was there, Chuck? No.
Well, they had Bill Bradley when I was in school.
Right.
He was pretty good. But he never won. He was on their first 5 to 4 years, and they never won the conference during that time. Now, his senior year, they went all the way and took second in the state, lost by 1 point, which they should have won, but he was awfully good. But Herky always managed to beat him, or Hillsborough always managed to beat him in the conference.
See, back then they had 3 classes of competition. S for small, M for medium, and L for large. That's what they were. You were either S, M, or L.
And we were L.
We were L.
We were very
400 students, we were L. And schools like, what have you, McClure and Kirkwood, back then they had 1,600 students. They were L. Rittner, they had 3,000 students. They were L. I don't know where the cutoff was. But
Herky 200.
Herky was an L. So when it got down to like going to state, well, of course, then again, Crystal City didn't have many more students than we did. They were an L. And they took second to state. So, you know, you had to be awfully small school to get either the S or the M. And I don't understand how they divided back then, but I do remember that. A little bit tougher to go anywhere in the state final when your competition had 10 times as many students. That's a good excuse then.
Yeah.
Back on the subject of church, how big were your churches back then, as far as members?
Well, the Methodist church back then, you know, Chuck was talking about how small the Assumption Catholics got here in Herculaneum. Same thing with the Methodists. I remember they always put the little thing up showing how many people were in a church service and how much money was taken in. It was right at small church, but you know, a good crowd would be, I don't know how many were on the membership roll, but a good crowd would be 80, 85. And I don't go to that church anymore, but Mr. Stotler, he still goes. He's on the board down there. And he tells me sometimes they might have, they're lucky to have 30 people, 25 or 30 of them. Sort of a dwindling, dying church. Well, it's right on the border of, you know, go run. And a lot of people had to scare him about the lead and what have you, but a lot of people have left and gone to the Methodist Church in Festus. And of course, the town's diminished in size. The town is, there's nothing to draw from, you know, unless you go out west, out Fort Scenic, out Fort St. Paul area. But that's the size the church was back then, if I remember correctly.
Well, Assumption was pretty large when I was in grade school. In fact, they had their own school. A lot of the kids I grew up with actually went to Assumption School. I didn't go, but then they came to Herky High School. I think they did away with Assumption School probably in, I'd say 1958, 59, somewhere in there, I'm guessing.
Right, that's probably right.
Yeah. But Herky got a lot of athletes from those kids who went to Assumption. And now since then, it's gotten smaller and smaller. In fact, we go to Our Ladies in Festus, and I see a lot of the old Herky people that used to go to Assumption. They now later go to Our Ladies or Sacred Heart in Festus.
Did you guys have any sort of holiday town celebrations back then?
Well, there was always a big holiday visit by Santa in what was called downtown Herculaneum, which doesn't exist anymore. Down in the area of Bill Run, there was probably 20 or 30 businesses, if you count them all together. And as I remember, I could be wrong, but I always remember sort of a large metal pipe sticking out of the parking area, and they would go out and harvest a Christmas tree, big one. At least it was big to me, 25, 30-foot Christmas tree, and carve him up so he'd fit down that pipe and straighten it up. And I don't know who decorated, probably the fire department. They decorated and string about 1,000 lights on it, and that was a big deal to us back then. And everybody go down on, they'd sing Christmas carols and what have you. I really don't know who organized. I remember as a kid going down there. It's a pretty neat deal. I do remember that.
We did the same thing. In fact, when I was in high school, we had a chorus club. They'd take the small ensembles and we'd go down and sing around that Christmas tree. And it's kind of a big deal to go down there and sing. I mean, there was a bunch of people standing around watching. And other than that, then after that, that Herky High School used to have a thing called the Carnival. That took, I mean, they did it once a year, and it was a pretty big project. They had floats and all that kind of stuff, and a big parade, and it would set up tents right here on the parking lot. It used to be the parking lot, now they're still in there. They'd set a great big tent up there. It's a pretty big deal right there.
Like Chuck said, in addition to the Christmas thing that was going on downtown, we had those school carnivals, and they had stuff like, you know, the octopus ride, make everybody sick, had a Ferris wheel, and I remember they had all these silly games, you know, you could go in knock over the milk bottles and what have you. And this one year, I do remember this. I was probably about 5th grade. You know, I was a little bitty guy, and they let the high school kids come over there. And I'm pretty sure the guy, Chuck might be able to correct me on it, I think the guy that was throwing the ball for us, little kids, so we could win these prizes, they were giving away these, believe it or not, they were giving away parakeets. They had these different colored parakeets, really, you laugh. You remember that, Bill? They had these parakeets in these little bitty cages, and if you could knock over, you know, 7 milk bottles or 5 of the 7, you got this stupid bird. And of course, we wanted a bird. We were all little kids. And I think the guy's name we got out of high school was one of the high school jocks, was Claude Cooley. Does that sound right?
Mm-hmm. Butch.
Butch came over there, Butch Cooley. Of course, you know, he was massive to us. Had these big pipes on him, sort of a campus stud. So we give him the dime or whatever it was to throw these balls, and he was cleaning them out. He wanted all these birds and stuff. And these poor little birds, they were pitiful. I remember he said, "You guys really need to take care of these parakeets." We took them on the Ferris wheel.
They didn't like Ferris?
They died.
They died?
Yeah. They died, probably. The time we got back after going around 8 or 9 times, they were dead. You know, they were undernourished and everything. I guess we got them all screwed up. But
They weren't used to flying?
then we tried to get him to throw again for us, and he washed his hands of it. He thought we were pretty stupid for little kids. And, you know, he told us not to do it, and we did it anyway. We killed 2 or 3 of those birds on that Ferris wheel. That is one thing I do remember about our school carnival. I mean, it's pretty sad when you just remember that, but a long time ago, guys.
Do you remember any kind of natural disaster like a flood or a fire or anything that's happened in Hervey?
Well, you know, the creek down there, Dugan Creek, that was, I don't know, it seems to me like it was like a yearly episode. I doubt it really was, but it has come out of its banks numerous times. Been up over the 2-lane bridge, been up over the 4-lane bridge before, and that sort of pretty well isolates good old Herculaneum, particularly back when there wasn't any Interstate 55, which is hard to imagine. But we didn't have one when we grew up, and it would block off getting into Herky. Of course, you could up north by Peasley, that is, but all the bridges, both those bridges would be underwater. And back then they had really no game plan, I don't think, about how to avoid it. Of course, they've had great ideas since then, it hasn't worked either. But we had that creek up. I don't know, Chuck, anything else?
One of the biggest disaster I can think of was when the high school burned down on Christmas Day, 1946, I think it was. I was in kindergarten. I lived right there. You smelled smoke, couldn't figure out where it was at. And then we finally figured out it was a high school on fire. That was a really big deal then. I mean, every fire department in the county was here. After it burned, all the kids went to different churches, Methodist Church, Baptist Church. They didn't go to Assumption because Assumption already had classes of its own, so they also were in the KP Hall. That's the only place that I can remember, the KP Hall, the Methodist Church, and the Baptist Church. They took in, and that took I was in kindergarten, and when I came back to this school, it was in the 3rd grade.
Do you know what caused the fire?
You know, Bill may know. I don't really know if anybody really knew. It might have been the furnace or something, but they did manage to save the old gym, which at that time was a pretty nice gym. That was the only part that was saved. The rest of it was gutted. I mean, the floors and everything were gone. But I'm not really positive what started.
Did you guys ever do anything or any activities down at the river? Anything like that?
Well,
You mean legal?
yeah, I remember going, we go down there and go fishing every now and then. Never really fished to catch fish to eat, but I remember going down by the Trestle Bridge, which is off limits now. They went over to the old bluffs where the original shot tower was. made shot for the war. I remember walking across the trestle and we'd fish off the banks there and catch river fish because the Joachim, empties into the Mississippi there. And catch gars, which very few people eat gars, but they're terrible creatures. I remember catching those things, and I guess it was catfish. We'd catch catfish, but I wasn't real big on river fish. This happened maybe for me a dozen times. One of the biggest recreation things I remember, this is pretty old-fashioned. Back when we were kids, they didn't dispose of trash the way they do nowadays with these trash trucks. We had a large city dump down right by Joachim Creek there, where the trestle was, behind Gold Run, and everybody just threw their trash there, or else you just had a barrel behind your house. We had a 50-gallon oil drum behind our house, and just like everybody else in Herky, we burned it. Then when the glass and stuff built up, or the metal off the cans, you'd haul it down, you'd throw it on the dump. And recreational down there involved Mr. Patterson's father. He was here at Henderson School. A lot of guys would go down there on Saturdays and Sundays right out of school and shoot rats with 22 rifles. And I was always amazed at how many were down there. I mean, they were everywhere. And these weren't mice, these were rats. And his dad, Tom Patterson, he's one of the marksmen down there. We go down there and he had 10 or 12 laying on a log there. And he shot with his 22. And I tried it a few times. I wasn't very good at it. But, that wasn't like fishing, but I probably put more time in on that than I did fishing.
Well, I did that too when I shot rats, but I can remember my grandpa lived next door to us, and he was probably in his 80s, and he and I would walk down from the north end of the football field, across the football field, down to Joachim, down to Artesian Park, which was a park at that time. It wasn't a lake. And we would go fishing there. He fished, I played. I didn't like to fish. He had these old cane poles, and he'd catch carp, great big old fish like that. Tasted terrible. I hated fish when I was little. Now I love it. Of course, I don't eat carp. No.
These guys haven't mentioned that down on the Mississippi, basically right behind the Methodist Church, and you can still drive down there to the landing area. It's all shale rock and basically rock. But on Sundays and Saturdays both, a lot of people put their boats in down there. They had boat ramps and what have you. There'd be a big crowd and places to buy barbecue or what have you, soda. I assume they sold a little bit of everything on these Sundays. But there'd be several hundred people down there, and lots of people with speedboats, they called them then, pleasure boats, launching them. And I think the river, if I remember correctly, was a little bit cleaner than it is now. But it was nothing to go down there and have people everywhere, and you drove your car right on the rock, and there'd be a landing area probably between the railroad trestle and the water, at least 150 feet or so. A lot of room. Park a lot of cars, get out and barbecue and picnic. Remember that, Jake?
Yeah, but you talk about the river being cleaner then. According to the Corps of Engineers, it's 20 times cleaner now because they quit letting them dump all the pollutants in from St. Louis. Seriously. I read that a year or so ago in a Missouri Conservation magazine that the river in this area down here all the way to St. Genevieve is almost 20 times cleaner as far as pollutants because all the factories had to quit dumping their waste.
Well, that just shows you what I know about pollution.
Well,
Not much.
just a correction there, minor one.
What was it like around town, like during times of war, like Korea and Vietnam and things like that?
Well, see, the Korean War, we were like, John and I were 6 or 7 years old, so I don't really remember any of that. During the Vietnam thing, I remember that very well because we both were in service. And we both lucked out. We didn't have to go overseas. Whereas we had a lot of friends that did.
I went overseas.
When he went overseas to Hawaii, he counted overseas. And I stayed in the States, and we were sort of the lucky 6% that didn't have in the Army. You know, that's where most combat people came from, was the Army. And neither one of us had to go over there, but we had a lot of friends who went. And that was big news, you know, just about like what's going on now in Iraq. It was big news. Same type of situation, basically. I was sort of always worried. I had no intentions of really volunteering to go anywhere. Truth of the matter. Serving the Army, you know, to me was fine. I liked staying where I was, to be honest.
Yeah, well, it was a different situation back then, like during Vietnam. There was a military draft, and you had a military obligation unless you had a way to get out of it. And so I joined the National Guard, and they activated one company in the whole state of Missouri, and that was the company I was in. So we got to go to Fort Benning in 1968. Went down there with 105 guys, 60-something went to Vietnam. I lucked out and stayed at Fort Benning. Got out. My ETS, my enlistment time ran out in August of '69, and then they released the company in November of '69. So, and during the Korean War, of course, I was pretty young then, but I had some uncles that went right over. They went right over and was in tanks over there, and that was no fun deal either. But it's a completely different deal now with no draft, which I hope they never start that back up.
Well, like Frank said, we lucked out because in '68, you know, it was going on pretty good in Vietnam. When we went in, we were in combat engineer unit, but we were both selected for a nuclear weapon training program. We went into nuclear weapons, and there wasn't any nuclear weapons at that time, attachments in Vietnam, so neither one of us went to Vietnam. He stayed in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, and I went to Honolulu, Hawaii for 20 months. They've always sort of made light of that, but I wasn't about to volunteer to go any further. And so, you know, things came out all right. It's just, I didn't really try to get out of anything, but it's just the way it came out, you know, just luck.
Do you guys remember any businesses that stand out more than others, and if so, who owned them?
Well, Donnelly's Barbershop, which now is up here at the Wedge by St. Thomas, it was always downtown. It was downtown business. Jim Donnelly owns the business now. His father was a barber, Buster. It was downtown. This grocery store we worked at had a hardware store, Fax hardware store, a pretty big store. Had everything from 1890 up to what we actually needed in it. It was a neat place. You guys would think it was corny, but I always used to go in there and look at. I was amazed at the new appliances he had that were 40 and 50 years old, brand new, still in the box, and a thing we call linoleum floors, which are inlaid floors now. It came in rolls, you guys, like a carpet, and he had those rolls of linoleum standing on end. And to keep from unrolling, they tied them with like straps and rope. And they'd been there so long, if you dare try to unroll one of them, like buy one and put on your kitchen floor or something, it would just shatter like a piece of glass. You know, they were like 40 years old, and he was selling them as new. And they were slow movers, I guess. Chuck's the one who knows about all the business. He remembers all the business.
Well, I remember Niece's Bakery had the best donuts I've ever had anywhere. They were 3 for a dime. Really loved them. And next to that was the Bonita Theater. Went there several times. Cost 16 cents to get in. It was segregated. the white people sat downstairs, and the black people sat in the balcony. And I remember the first few rows of seats were cushioned, and then from there on down they were wood. It wasn't open long though. It closed in the early 50s, I think. You also had a bowling alley, 4 lanes. They had Vaughn's Dairy, which is a real, like a Vaughn's Dairy, and Campus Inn, which is right here where one of these buildings was at. That's where the kids all hung out afterwards, and after school. And it was really a good place to go because it was about the only place you could go, and that's where most everybody hung out.
We used to go over to what is now going to be the new superintendent's office. Mary Lou's Tavern was called when we were in school. No one thought a thing about it. We had an open lunch hour. You started going anywhere you wanted. You go to Campus Inn up here, you could eat here at the cafeteria. I remember, I thought the food was excellent in the cafeteria. It had a co-op where you could buy sandwiches and ice creams, and a lot of kids danced to a jukebox. But if you want to eat lunch over at the tavern, you were welcome to go there. No one said a word. We went over there and
Had a few beers.
no beer. The guy who ran it was real strict. There was no horseplay. And his wife, the Moppins, ran it, Bug and Mary Lou. She originated the little miniature hamburgers, and she'd fry those little miniature hamburgers, and we'd either take them with us or eat them over there. No one said a word about it. Of course, there was never anything happened over there. You know, there'd be customers in there, mainly guys workers from St. Joe coming in on their shift to have a couple beers, or more than a couple, but we just got up right there with them, ate our hamburgers, and see, I can't imagine that going on now, but we didn't think a thing about it. Neither did the school. So that was different.
Where'd you go shopping in Hershey?
Well, as far as clothing, I was real small at the time, but across from Doe Run, next to my dad's filling station, there used to be a dry goods store there, which I don't remember. My dad used to talk about. I think Levy, does that sound right, Bill? Levy's ran that.
Levy was up here, and that was wax.
Okay. They had a dry goods store there, but I think I must have been real small then because I don't remember being in that store. But I guess people shopped in there, and like he said, for hardware needs, you went down the fence if you could find anything.
But there,
Bud Barrett, yeah, was a B&L Supply. That was downtown. That was a hardware place, and remember there was a TV shop, a little bit of TV shop, Sylvania TVs. That was Sidger Clue, an old timer here in Herky.
Shoe shop.
He did that. He did the TV shop, but he worked on the refinery at Doe Run. Was his real job. Then we had a drugstore, pretty good sized drugstore, Shelley's Drug, right on the V there, right in front of where they used to put the Christmas tree, or right behind it rather. And we hung out there a lot. They had sodas and cakes and chips, and that was a hangout spot.
Cool Hall, next to the drugstore.
Had a pool hall, a lot of taverns. A lot for kids to hang. Well, we went in, but they didn't serve you. But I remember my mother. She was always big in the Methodist church with Sunday school and stuff. She used to get aggravated that she said I counted the taverns once, and we've got 3 more taverns in Herky and we do churches. But small town. Everybody had little businesses.
A lot of small grocery stores. There would be, I seem like at one time I counted 7 taverns and 5 or 6 small grocery stores that were just actually part of somebody's house. They just started selling groceries out of it. Because most people walked. If you went down to the IGA or the Lucky's, the Lucky's delivered. IGA may have too, I don't know.
So you got to remember, very few ladies drove a car. Very few. It just was something that's unusual now when you think of. There's one of the high school guys driving a car. His girlfriend's got one too. Things weren't like that. Very few of our mothers, some did now, but very few of them drove. and they were totally dependent, a lot of them, on their husbands or their neighbors if they wanted to go shopping. We shop for clothes and stuff mainly in Festus, a place called Goldman's Department Store, who had a monopoly on tennis shoes and everything else. You didn't have much choice. Of course, you could run in St. Louis, but that was a big deal. That was a big deal to go to St. Louis to shop, and which we did, but not very often. You got by with what was here, we didn't know any different.
It was actually a Schulte's bus line came through Herky, and would actually come down our street and turn the corner right where the footbridge was at. We'd go catch that bus, I can't cost a dime, and they'd take you over to Festus. You go shopping, and when you want to come home, got back on Schulte's bus, and they brought you home.
In your opinions, what do you think led to the disappearance of all these shops and bowling alleys and theaters and everything?
I think basically it's like you read the paper every day, because they really could not compete with the volume or the variety of merchandise they carry with these bigger distributors, like Walmart, Venture was a big deal at one time, Kmart, Target, and all those, they just couldn't compete. They couldn't sell for the same price or even come close to it. And they got squeezed out, I think. These people too were people that probably worked, when I think back, for the hours my dad put in at his garage and car dealership. They thought nothing of working 12 hours a day. And I don't think people want to do that much anymore. I don't think I would. But these individual shop owners, they would stay open for 10 to 12 hours every day. And again, I think, it's the fact that they couldn't compete price-wise.
I believe you're right. They got squeezed out, and plus the automobile, almost everybody had their own transportation, so they would drive. They don't mind driving to Festus if they can buy it cheaper, or wherever, St. Louis.
But at the groceries, you didn't have much choice on the groceries. You went to a small grocery store. There weren't places like, again, Walmart or Snooks or Shop and Save. These places didn't exist. These were small grocery stores. And you didn't know anything different about it. It was okay because you had never had the opportunity to go in a large grocery store.
Well, then I look back at, going back to these little grocery stores like Lucky's AG, and Jim House had the IGA, which was a company store. They ran these stores when they got old. They became old people, and their kids, when you look back at it, the way I look at it, their kids had no interest in taking over their stores. Most of them, like Mary Lucky, Homer's daughter, she was in our class, went away to college. She had no reason to come back here. She didn't want to run a grocery store. Her two brothers became insurance salesmen. They didn't want to work in a grocery store 7 days a week. And same way with Jim House, his kids had no interest in taking over his store. People just died out. These hardware stores, Feck. I remember his son Billy ran it for a while, and he was driven out of business. Like he said, by the larger hardware stores. I don't know, Lowe's didn't have anything to do with it, or Home Depot, but Walmart, the rest of them, they can't compete with them. So, didn't make any profit. So they just disappeared.
You mentioned being able to just drive to Festus. Other than that, what kind of transportation or how available were cars back then?
Well, I was going to bring this up a while ago. I go by the parking lot out there where you guys park. I don't know about the numbers. Kids say there's 454 kids here now or so, high school. I think we had about that, didn't we?
A little over 400.
A little 400. Well, I remember when we were seniors, and our dad sold cars. We were one of the few kids and we shared a car, that had a car to come to school. There might have been, 20, 30 cars for kids, maybe. No kids had cars.
The teachers had one car. They might have 3 kids
Yeah,
a wife and themselves, they have one car.
yeah, it's a totally different ballgame now, you know, with you guys getting all these cars. And most of you got nice cars, or nice trucks. I remember our car, 1962, when we started driving, we were, well, 61, I guess it was, we were 16, was a repossessed 1956 Plymouth that my dad, you know, the bank took back, and it was, when we first got it, it wasn't much of a car. A lot of rust and whatever, and they had it fixed up, but he had the guys at the shop fix it up for us. But, you know, we didn't get a new car. We were tickled to death with the 56 Plymouth, little 3-speed on the column, black and white. Oh yeah, nice car, we thought. Today's standards, piece of junk.
So what was your first car?
My first car was a 49 Chevy. Drove the wheat and had all the rods knocking in it. That's what over to Dugan's and Merle Wilkeney fixed it. One of his ace mechanics. But my parents' car, we was a one car family, and like you said, when you go to school, there was 5 or 6 cars, is about it, and from kids driving. I had to walk to school every day because it was only about 300 feet.
That's good.
But most everybody had one car except the people that sold them.
True. I can think back to my dad's business. They had a car dealership in Crystal City, which back then was considered a new building. They built it in '52, I think. But he kept the old garage up in Herky open because he kept a mechanic there and a secretary there. And, you know, talk about pollution and stuff. I remember watching those guys that worked for him. They'd change oil in the car, they'd just pour it on the ground. Just pour it out on the ground. And the interior of that garage was, and we always say this, even as kids, we go, man, I hope this place never catches on fire. Everything was just coated with oil and grease. And like you'd walk out there, you'd track grease for 100 feet. And this thing had been there since like 1910. And you can imagine, well anyway, as soon as I always remember this, I knew what would happen, everybody knew what happened. The minute they moved out of that place and closed it down, somebody set it on fire. And Bill, being with the fire department, being the chief, he can empathize with this. That thing had so much oil, grease, and just filth. It burned for like a week. And finally, they just gave up putting it out. You couldn't put it out. And my dad always said that, he said, the minute we close that, you watch, somebody's gonna come by and torch that thing, and by golly, they did. Yeah. And the only thing was left, remember, was the safe. It was just standing there by itself, it couldn't melt, of course. And that was the end of that place.
What kind of recreational activities did you do growing up?
Well, we were kids, especially when we were younger, we played a lot of pickup baseball games during the summer, just get some kids in the neighborhood. We played on the, where the practice football field is over here. That was the main field, well, it was the only field where they had the little league games and the high school games. If the bigger kids weren't using the field, we'd go down there and play Indian ball a lot. And then my grandparents up on Joachim, which wasn't called Joachim then, they had a vacant lot beside their house. There's a house there now. We thought it was a big lot. It's really not. It's probably 100 feet wide. We had a little baseball field there. And you get about 10, 11 kids and put 4, 5, or 6 on a team. You could play a regular little baseball game because it was so small. You know, we had special rules. You know, if you shot a ball off somebody's shingles or something, it was a ground rule double or an out because we sort of outgrew the field after the ball. We started hitting across Joachim there, and of course that was probably on about 140 feet at the most. Played a lot of baseball. Played basketball. Everybody in town seemed like, not everybody, but a lot of kids, their parents would put them a basketball goal up. And I remember behind our little house up on Joachim, we had a dirt court with the basketball goal on a telephone pole. And we had outdoor lighting. I mean, it wasn't permanent lighting, we made it. Strung some plugs up in trees, and had those orange extension cords, run them into the back porch of the house. And we played a lot of night basketball. We even went out there in wintertime. I remember my dad, he sold coal for a while, and he had these big tarps, canvas tarps. And we would put the canvas tarps down if we knew it was gonna snow. And when it snowed, we'd peel the tarps back and get the snow off, just, an area about maybe a third the size of this room, just enough so we could go out there and shoot baskets. Put our gloves on. We did a lot of that, It's hard getting kids going out in cold weather now. We did a lot. We didn't have a lot to do. We didn't have anywhere to go. We didn't have transportation like you guys do. Played chase, but you guys have no idea what chase is. And I guess we did that all the way up through, we might have been freshman or sophomore, I don't know. But you chase through town. You'd have teams, and you chase each other on foot. And I remember it. We had some great games until you ran into somebody's clothesline or something. That happened. But you'd run downtown, you go through people's yards, and I don't remember the real rules. I just remember doing it, and we were always told to quit doing it because people complained. We didn't have anything to do. You were lucky to go to the show on weekends. You got your dime or quarter, whatever it costs, go down to Festus to a movie theater.
No, basically, we did the same thing, a lot of Indian ball and basketball and chase. But then I was lucky enough to be on the first Little League team they had in Herculaneum. I think it was 1953. Frank was on the same team. Sure. He was on the cards. We were lucky enough to win because we had Wayne Kinder, the black guy that's the janitor over here. He was on our team, and he could hit the darn highway from this practice field for ball. He was at a young age. He was the best athlete I've seen come out here. He was really good. Then we also had, on Saturday nights, we had a thing called Teen Town. Some of the kids' parents would open up the KP Hall down at the end of the main street and had a jukebox, and boys and girls would go in there and dance. And it was the very first place that you probably have never heard of them, but there's a band called Jules Blattner and the Teen Tones. In fact, they're still playing in St. Louis today. That was the very first place he played was down there.
They played Word Fast Eddie's in Alton.
Yeah. But if you, I seen him, they was interviewing him on TV one time, and he said, they asked him where his first gig was. He says, it was at a teen town in Herculaneum, Missouri. It was fun.
Well, I always remember the good part. I tell those people all the time about growing up in a small town where everyone didn't have a million things they could do, like, all their electronic gizmos and what have you. As you get on the phone, we could get on the phone, him and I could, and in 15 minutes have 8 or 9 kids in the backyard. Because everybody else in the same boat we were in. They wanted to do something. So they'd come up to our grandmother's backyard. We'd have something, or we'd meet them here at the ball field. We had basketball goals in our yard, the yard down the street. We had kids everywhere, like Coach Helms that teaches here. He had a whole family of brothers. All we had to do was call one of them, and we'd have 4 or 5 guys right there, plus our neighbors. We always didn't ever have to worry about company to play ball. I always had my twin brother, of course, but we'd get a whole yard full in 15, 20 minutes, which was pretty neat growing up.
I used to go up there.
Yeah, Chuck did. Chuck was quite older than us, but we let him join in anyway.
Thinking back, what is each of yours fondest memory of Herculaneum?
Well, with me, I really like the town as far as being a safe sanctuary, and I don't know, my high school days were my best days. I had a lot more social type activities. Even though I enjoyed college and was in a fraternity and all that, it was completely different than high school. You bond more with the high school guys because you're in their houses and stuff all the time. You go up here and on Hill Street or on Thurwell, eat dinner at people's house. stay overnight, or they'd be at your house. You know, and when you go away to college, that stuff doesn't happen. You sort of lose contact. Well, you lose contact with a lot of your high school chums, but I remember a lot more neat things in high school and junior high growing up than I do in college, as far as recalling names. You know, those guys you go to high school with, we had our 40th reunion 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And I still remember all those guys. You know, a few of them died, what have you, but and everybody's changed. You know, everybody's old looking, lost hair, gray hair, heavy. The girls, it amazed me. The girls we had in our class of 63, we used to think some of them were really catching me out. Shouldn't be saying this because it's on tape. But boy, you know, we saw them 2.5, 3 years ago. 50 miles of bad road. And I was thinking, glad I didn't get tied up with them. So, even one of our teachers back then, Mr. Rasmussen, he was a hard guy, a big heavy set guy, taught citizenship. And he was a really neat guy, but he didn't put up with any guff. He got to talking and rambling on at the reunion that we had down here at Frederick's. That he remembered the girls' track team, 1963, challenged the men faculty to a 400-yard relay, which is back then a 440-yard relay. So we had a good girls' track team. We thought they were good. So he remembered lining up, whatever. I think he was going to run number 2 or whatever it was, waiting for the baton to get to him. And he said, I looked at the head of me and I thought, there's no way in the world I'm going to be able to keep up with this little girl. Her name was, I can mention it because she's down in Texas. Little Lonnie Cranky. And he goes, and that little petite body, and here I was 60 pounds overweight. He said, I just knew she was going to smoke when she got that baton, which she did. He points over at her, she's there at the reunion. She'd really expanded. And he said, and looking at her now, he said, I think I could take her. She didn't think that was funny.
No, I can't think that was very funny.
Yeah, we all did. We laughed because we thought,
Well, who won the race?
well, the girls in 63 won it, but I think the guys, those old teachers would have won it then. They were all about 75 years old.
I like growing up here just because it was fun. You know, we didn't have a lot of pressure on us to do much. You know, there really wasn't. It just seemed like there was only a certain amount of things you had to do, and the rest of the time, all we did was drive around, go around cruising. Of course, $3 or $4 is a lot of money. Then you could, the gasoline was whatever it was, 18 cents a gallon or whatever. You know, you didn't worry about having insurance. I don't know where the insurance was on the cars or not. You didn't worry about stuff like that. I'm sure we had it. We just had a good time. Always, to me, there was something to do. Coming to the ball games was a big deal. You know, just or we didn't have a game that night, and somebody else had a game. Going to the ball game was a big deal to me. But we didn't. I don't think we expected much to entertain us.
One thing I can remember I really enjoyed, but after the Little League games, which there was an awful lot of people who attended these darn Little League games, well, by that time it was dark, and there'd be a group of us walk up to Mises Bakery and eat those donuts 3 for $10. They were so good. Boy, I remember one night I ate a dozen of them.
You guys said that the population has really diminished in Herculaneum. Everything is shrinking. What roughly was the size of Herculaneum back then, as far as population?
Well, I don't.
Well, you know,
We don't know.
we didn't have any city out west of Scenic Drive, and nobody lived out there, which is all considered city limits of Herculaneum now. I would think that, I don't know, Bill probably knows more about this than we do, or I do. 400 or 500 people. I don't know, what do you think, Bill?
It varied. In the last few years, it hasn't changed much. Even though you've lost a lot, you've gained that newer area.
Right, out
It's
west.
probably not, probably 1,300 or so when we were.
That's what I was gonna think.
Oh, okay.
It's more than 500 or 600. I remember this sign, you know, you come into Herky now, it says 2805 or something. I do remember the sign quite a few years ago, it said 1800 exactly. You know, now, because I always wonder how do they know it's 1800 exactly, but I remember that sign. But where I live, in Herculaneum, was not Herculaneum. Of course, it was not incorporated till 72, I don't know, something like that. We had no city government, so to speak. There was no councilman, alderman, mayor, collectors. We had no city police department till the early 70s, if I'm not mistaken. Could be wrong about that. So things have changed.
All right, well, I think that's about all the questions we got for you.
I would like to ask, we were just talking about some of the teachers they had in school and remembrances of some of them and,
Oh, yeah, that's easy to remember. We had, like our basketball coach was Coach Dean Myers. He's a really nice guy. Too nice for us guys. And he went on to Eureka. We saw him, I see him all the time. Coach Holmes was the football coach and a dandy football coach. He's still living. He's basically a legend around here. Mr. Rasmussen taught citizenship and other social studies. We had Mr. Herbert was our principal. He's still doing well. Mr. Spurgeon was our superintendent when I was a senior. I'm trying to think. We had some funny teachers too.
Coach Jennings.
Coach Jennings, Ike Jennings, Coach Mills. Dick Cook. Dick Cook wasn't here yet. He was still at Bristol.
He came in '64.
But we used to think, I'll let Chuck talk about his teachers too, but we used to think the teachers were quite well to do because they wore, all of them wore shirt and tie with a jacket. We thought, hey, this is a good deal. Look how rich they are. They all have ties and white shirts. We didn't know they were wearing cheap shirts, cheap ties, cheap jackets that they bought like at a cheap store, like a hardware store. We couldn't tell the difference. We thought they were wearing high dollar clothes. And they were wearing them because they were made to. That's how you dressed if you were a teacher, and that's how they dressed when they came to ball games. We had a picture of our district tournament in basketball. That was in '62 when him and Jay and I were juniors. And everybody in the crowd practically has a coat and tie on, watching a high school basketball game. The men are wearing coats and ties to go to a basketball game. Things have changed. Remember your teachers, Chuck?
Well, I had basically the same ones, but I also had Mr. Taylor, who was a superintendent when I was younger. And then when I graduated, it was Mr. Black. And our principal was Mr. Miller. And we had Mr. and Mrs. Turner, who Turner was the basketball coach and excellent. My senior year was the first year that I think Herculaneum won the county championship in football and basketball. Which I don't know, it may have happened before that, but I think that was the first time they ever did that. We only had a class of 60 in our class. The class ahead of us had 120, and I think the class below us had quite a few, but that was, our freshman year was freshman year for Fox. All the kids from Fox went to Herculaneum until my freshman year, and that was their first year, and that knocked the Herculaneum way down. So
I do remember, I should mention, Mr. Freeman, William Freeman, our sort of, actually K through 8, kindergarten through 8th grade principal. He was a great principal. Probably the best there ever was. He was very strict, let's put it that way. We knew he was. So we had a smooth ride through, really a smooth ride through eight years of school, because there was a tight ship there, and it was legendary that you did behave. So we weren't really much trouble. We weren't allowed to be much trouble. So I should mention Mr. Freeman.
Mrs. Thomas, Bruce's mom.
Mrs. Thomas.
Talking about elementary teacher, I remember all mine, Mrs. Kaufman's kindergarten, which we had down in the old art room. And first grade was Mrs. Vos. Second grade was Mrs. Fortune. Third grade, we had a repeat with Mrs. Vos for some reason. Somebody must have quit or something. Fourth grade was grandmother, Mrs. Lillian Parker. Fifth grade was Mrs. Larkin. Sixth grade was this Mr. Freeman. He was also the principal. But I remember Mrs. Vos, she had this son, Larry, and I've got a old yearbook of him. You remember him? Sure, Larry. He was involved with student council, and I think he played a little basketball. He would come over when we were little kids on our lunch hour. After lunch, we'd go down to the basement of the Roy Taylor Elementary, and it was just a basement, and they had a bed sheet put up, and like twice a week, if you behaved or something, I don't know how you got the reward for it, made a decent grade. He would show, he'd come over from the high school with a couple other high school guys and show us these little movies. Remember that?
They were cartoons.
Really? But he'd come over and show these things. They lasted about 15 minutes. We thought it was a big deal. I remember we always sort of idolized that guy because, he was tall and distinguished. And after he went to college, I remember, and he became an Air Force pilot. And I was reading the Post-Dispatch one day, years later, and a little article in there, and he'd been killed in his plane crashed out on the West Coast on a training mission. I think this is even way before Vietnam. But I remember that guy. And
What's his name?
Vos, V-O-S-S, Larry. And I remember Mrs. Vos, her husband, Larry's dad, died when we were like in first grade. And then when we were in the third grade, she remarried, remember that, Frank?
Married Janet.
Married Jimmy Manning.
Jimmy Manning, our school.
He was our custodian.
He guy.
Then he died. So she started a tragic life. Lost 2 husbands and her only child. But I remember her. I remember all the elementary teachers.
Of course, Miss Robinson, our counselor, who the gymnasium named after. Miss Robinson, we really liked her. Boy, she ruled the roost, though. She did all the testing with the Ohio basics and all that stuff. And it's a shame these guys and gals are missing her to see how some of those teachers, how strict they were in those days. And but we liked her. But there was no goofing around going on. And I remember some of the
Sure, Mr. Kempton?
oh sure.
Mr.
Kempton, he wore white buck shoes a lot, leather white shoes. Real character. I remember one time when my father was telling me that the school board came through to check on some goofing around in school, wanted to check on their teachers. They said, Mr. Kempton, they had what they call Bunsen burners, you guys. They were little gasoline burners. You wouldn't dream of that now. There was about 10 of them lit up. They walked in his room and they're in there roasting wieners on the Bunsen burners. The president of the school board came up behind him and said, excuse me. So he turned around without missing a lick and said, do you care for mustard or ketchup on yours? Now I thought that was funny because one little one knew of him. He's just a funny guy. I don't know if he got fired for that or not, but I remember he was sure entertaining as a teacher. That's a pretty neat guy, though. And ladies, you know,
All right, I think that's it, guys.
Anything else you want to say?
thank you. Appreciate it. Bill, Curtis.
Enjoy it, guys.
You too.
Okay.